Now it is. Yeah. Okay. Ooh, should we not be recording this?
Go ahead, you can fix anything.
I don't know. The
computers
thing.
now.
Oh, okay. All right.
Okay. So what were the requirements for the degree when you earned it? The pharmacy degree?
So when I applied to pharmacy school, I think most of the schools today are all PharmD. It wasn't that way when I applied. So you had to at least do 5 years, which is 2 years of undergrad and then 3 years of pharmacy school to get the BS degree. And then at that time, some schools had a BS and a PharmD program. So you would apply to the BS program, and then if you wanted a PharmD, you would have to apply separately to the PharmD program while you were actually in the BS program. I didn't want to have to do that, so I just applied to an all PharmD school. So I just had to get in one time.
Oh, okay.
But it was different at that time. It wasn't all PharmD like I know a lot of the schools are nowadays, where you just get in, you get your PharmD, and you're done. So there really was a BS and a PharmD degree still at the time when I applied.
Okay. And what was pharmacy school like for you? Was it rigorous or?
Was it what? I'm sorry?
Very rigorous, the curriculum?
I wouldn't say it was very rigorous. I think the second year was probably the worst. It was a lot of difficult courses, the math and the science and the therapeutics and all that start to come into play. So I think academically the second year was probably the hardest. Fortunately for me, I went to a small school in North Carolina, and the classes I think were only about 75 people or so. So we were really more like family. We leaned on each other, we depended on each other. We all had the same classes, so we were all studying at the same time. We were all doing labs at the same time. So that made it a lot easier. And then the last year, the fourth year, were the rotations. I think that was difficult just because of all the traveling that was involved. You were in a different place every month. So you didn't know where you were going to be living from one month to the next, and you kind of lived out of your suitcase a lot. And long hours and that kind of thing with the rotation.
So whenever you did rotation, just wasn't here in the state? Could it be, or was it statewide?
It would be within the state of North Carolina where I went to school, but it could be in Wilmington or it could be in Asheville. Okay. So 1 month I would be in Moses Cone Hospital in Greensboro doing my internal medicine rotation, and then the next month I'd have to go back to Charlotte to do my community pharmacy rotation. So it was all within North Carolina, but it could have been anywhere in North Carolina.
And how much do you think that your rotations prepared you for the field?
Well, because I went to an all PharmD program, it was very clinically oriented. And so were the rotations, which I think was very good from an academic perspective. But the reality of pharmacy practice at the time wasn't always very clinically oriented. So you could do a residency, which I did, and there were some hospitals and clinics that had some, clinical programs that you could get into, but it certainly wasn't something that was plentiful for graduates. And there was such a need for pharmacists at the time that I graduated, particularly in the retail arena, that the education that I got probably was a lot better than I needed, really, to be honest, from where I started.
Right. Can you go into, once you graduated school, where you began and what has led you to where you are now?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I did a pharmacy practice residency at the VA Medical Center in Durham, North Carolina, for the first year when I got out. And I really love that because, I don't know if you're familiar with North Carolina, but in Durham, the VA Medical Center and Duke Medical Center literally face each other. So the rotations were back and forth between the two hospitals. So I really got to work with some doctors that were more VA, military driven and trained physicians. And then I also got to work with some Duke University folks, which were very research oriented. I mean, Duke does a lot of research in the medical field. So that residency turned out to be a lot better than even I expected, just because of the plethora of experience that I got while I was there. I finished that and I went to UNC Chapel Hill Hospital. I spent about 6 months there. It was supposed to be a clinical position, and actually, to be honest, the reason I left is because the longer I was there, the more I was just dispensing and I wasn't really working in the clinics. And it didn't pay near as much as a dispensing pharmacist made in retail, and so I said, if all I'm going to do is dispense, I'm going to make the money and I'm going to go over here and earn the money. So I went to retail. I worked for Eckerd Drug, which is no more. At the time, I started in North Carolina, and then as I mentioned before, there was such a need for pharmacists all over the country that Eckerd in Florida was recruiting strongly to get pharmacists to come down here. So I agreed to come down here to the Sarasota area and work for them. And I did that for a couple of years, and then I decided just that retail wasn't for me anymore. Not because I hated retail pharmacy, but because I was driven to kind of do some other things. And the more you grow in retail, the more your job becomes about the retail business as a whole and not necessarily just the pharmacy piece of it. And I really wanted to do more things that were pharmacy oriented. So as luck would have it, Medco was hiring here pharmacists at the time. And I had pretty much decided that I wanted to move out of Sarasota. Anyway, it's really more of a retirement area down there, and I was young and probably the youngest person in Sarasota at the time. So I got a job here and I moved to Tampa. And I have pretty much worked myself up in this company since then. I started as a staff pharmacist, then I was a lead for a while. Then I became a manager of operations. Then I moved to Ohio for a year because I was offered a director level position there. And then I guess about 18 months ago when Medco kind of restructured everything and went more enterprise driven from a management perspective as opposed to managing building by building by building, it wasn't really necessary for me to sit in Ohio anymore. So I asked the company, can I just go back to Tampa then? And they agreed. So now I'm back where I started.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
Explains a lot.
If you don't mind, unless you had a question from, I thought we might switch gears a little bit.
Sure.
And I want to ask about the political and social economic environment of the country and how it affected when you graduated and how it affected your career path.
Well, I graduated in 1998, so it was the end of the 90s. And actually, you know, economically, the economy was doing very well at the time. I think politically, it definitely wasn't the kind of political environment where you see today, where there's just so many high-level, intense things going on between, you know, healthcare and foreign policy and all that stuff. We didn't. If it was going on, let me just say this: it wasn't as well known as it is today. Maybe because we didn't have as much social media and that kind of thing back then. So I don't think we really felt a lot of political type pressures in the profession at the time. And then, like I mentioned, it was a fantastic time to be a pharmacist because they were in such high demand. So you could pretty much write your own ticket. And a lot of us, I would say it was rare that a student didn't have a job long before we ever graduated. So that was really, really good.
Okay.